Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a model showcase video for this undefined scale caricaturized Russian KV2 Heavy tank. The model that we have here is built for my own personal collection and is not for sale and or purchase. However, like I frequently mention in these videos, I often take on commission build projects from models ranging between 1/35 scale and 1/6 scale. For availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@EastCoastArmory.com. Now this model here is built pretty much out of the box, but I will be going over some of the aspects of this build as well as reviewing the base starter kit. So stay tuned because there's going to be a lot of info coming at you. Before we go any further with this video, let's go ahead and take a quick walk around this model. And this vehicle here is the Russian KV2 Heavy tank. Or at least that's what it's trying to pass off as. What this model actually is, it's a caricaturized version of the KV2 Heavy tank from the video game War Toons. Which, for this type of vehicle being on the EastCoastArmory.com channel, this marks another April Fool's Day build video, which seems to have been a tradition on this channel now for a couple of years. Now, for those out there who are unaware, War Toons is this online multiplayer video game that has been around for a number of years now. Now, War Toons takes place during a World War II time frame, but unlike many of the other video games that at one point in time actually cared about historical accuracy in their game, War Toons went with a different avenue out of the gate. Rather than going for that type of an aspect, they went for this cartoonish art style, which is seen on the in-game graphics. The game itself, I guess, is a class-based system, so that with the cartoonish art style is very reminiscent to me anyhow for something like Team Fortress 2. Now, like I mentioned, the game has been around for a number of years, and shortly after the game came out, a line of model kits emerged also from the game. Now, what's unique about these model kits is that all of them have the funky caricaturized format from the in-game graphics. Now, I don't play this video game, but apparently it must be somewhat popular because this game has been around for a number of years now, and it seems like every year there's a new release of model kits from the vehicles in the game. So one would imagine that the game must be doing well if they keep releasing new renditions of different type of tanks. One thing I personally like about these kits is that they have the look and feel and even the attitude of the vehicle in question, so whoever is coming up with the vehicle designs really knows what he's doing. Now from here, let's go ahead and take a step back to when the model was first started in order to get a good idea on what the base starter kit supplies you with. And here's the model at the start of the build. For the base starter kit, I'll be utilizing this Meng caricaturized KV2 Heavy tank kit from the War Toons lineup. Now this model here was acquired off of Amazon.com, and this is actually one of the positive attributes of these War Toons kits. Their distribution and availability are pretty good. Because of that, you can find these kits fairly easily on an online retailer, or you could possibly snag one of these in a brick and mortar store. These models here, although this one here is a relatively older release, are still quite common and can be found today with, again, not too much effort. Like with all of the War Toons kits, these models here do have some fairly simplistic assembly, which make them very user-friendly for beginners as well as just casual builders. We'll be going over that once I crack the box open. Now, starting with the model's graphic design, here we have the KV2 right here, dead center of the illustration. And the illustration quality is pretty good. It's basically on par with the other War Toons vehicles, which does have this nice little fun, little playful atmosphere to it, I should say. Now, the rest of the graphic design is quite typical for the War Toons lineup. Here we have the Meng corporate info. This is kit number 4, so it's definitely one of the more earlier ones. War Toons video game logo, as well as the usual graphic design found for these kits. One thing that's interesting about the graphic design, like I frequently mention, and I think I'm the only one to mention this, is that if you line up more than one of these kits together, you do have this nice little continuous little band thing going, which is clearly done for shelf display in stores and other type of display settings. Back to the KV, takes to the rest of the information. Here we have a sample of the built unit, the video game game developer's corporate info. And here on this side we have a sample of the recommended paints, which is 8K Pigments, which Meng basically has a little agreement with. And some more corporate information on this side here. On the back we have some video game advertisements, of course the video game and some in-screen shots of the vehicle in question. And it's Olga approved like the rest of the World War Toons lineup. Cracking open the box, just like with the other vehicles in the lineup, they open up from the side, which is usually fairly unusual, unless again, you're working on a World War Toons kit. Now, just like with the other kits in the lineup, everything is self-contained here in this bag. Now, also what's interesting to point out is if you notice, this model here does not have any safety type shrink wrap or even those little stickers that keep the box lids sealed. I'm not sure if this is something from, or which is typical from these older World War Toons kits, or possibly from a batch, or maybe it's just something that the vendor who I purchased the kit from double-checked it before he shipped it. It's hard to say. But all the contents are nicely, safely wrapped right here. Let me go ahead and grab a knife, slice this guy open so we could see what the plastic parts look like. All right, with everything dumped out. All right, here we have the Kitt Layout. Now, one thing that's nice about these World War Toons kits is that they are all comprised of injection molded plastic. There's nothing fancy like photo etch or aluminum parts or even resin components to contend with. It's as old school as you can get with a model of this medium. The only thing that's not plastic are the track bands, and ooh, this one's actually interesting where it actually gives you polycaps. I'll touch upon that in a minute, as well as the instructions and the markings. Okay, just like where I usually start on these kit reviews, it's the hull. The hull, again, is made from this green plastic, and the plastic, again, is this, I believe it might be ABS or it's some kind of polystyrene. Whatever it is, it's nice and durable, and these models do have some good chunk to them, I should say. They hold up very well, and again, it just makes for a nice little sturdy kit. With the hull out of the way, now it takes us to the runners. Here we have the upper hull sections. Now, like with the other World War Toons kits, they are very simplistic in their overall detailing, as everything is stylized and caricaturized in order to fit these wonky proportions for the type of game that this model is representing in. This is one of the rounded back versions of the KV, as opposed to one of the square backs, which is another flavor of the KV1. And being a KV2, we have this gigantic boxish turret that we have right here. There's the back, I believe, and the top deck. The main gun is rendered in a very simplistic format. However, it is a two-piece assembly, and you will have a seam to deal with this type of a model. This is true on some of the older World War Toons kits, not so much so on the more newer releases, but again, this kit being dated from 2017, it is going to be one of the earlier lineups. Okay, from this runner, takes us to this runner here, which looks to be more turret fittings and components. You have here the front rotor section, as well as some spare track and other fittings and odds and ends. Ooh, we do have some exhaust manifolds right here and here. They look like they should be simply added to this build once construction actually begins. And these two runners are one and the same, and they are the running gear. We have our road wheels, idler, and this would be the sprocket, as well as those little boxes which are found on the fender work of the KV series. Overall, again, a nice simplistic build that should be fairly quick to put together. From the runners, now takes us to the track, which is a single piece rubber bracelet type assembly, or I should say lack of assembly, as these tracks are basically ready to snap onto the model once you snip off this little nub that we have here. If I could get the bands into focus, there we go. You can see the track face detailing, which is again pretty good, again considering the cartoonish nature of this kit. Now the interior of the track, back into focus, and there we go. The inside of the track is again typical for these World War Toons kits where there's not a whole lot of stuff going on the inside, but it gives you the basic concept and idea where you have little segments going across for the track links, and then we have these two guide ribbons on either end. Now, this kit does give you a set of poly caps, just like on a Tamiya or those older Tamiya kits. And here we have the decal sheet. Now, just like with all these kits, they are water slide decals, and the Meng detail quality is always pretty good. I never really had problems with them in the past, and they should work out well for this build as well. From the markings takes us to the instruction manual, and this is typical for the World War II series with both the quality as well as with the general layout. Here we have all of the CAD drawings found on this model, and again, these illustrations are very, very user-friendly. A lot of thought went into these kits with their design work to make them as simplistic as possible for even the utmost beginner to assemble. A lot of the parts are very large, and many of the details are integrally molded in, which cuts down on the bits required. And here we have a sample of what the model should look like when you're done. And this, of course, tells you where all the markings go. Starting with the model suspension, all of the assemblies that you see here are stock with the kit and were assembled with the out-of-the-box components. No modifications were necessary to be made whatsoever. The wheels, they connect to the axles via poly caps, which is a very good feature. In fact, it's something that you'll generally see on such kits from Tamiya. Same is also true for the rear sprocket and the front idler as well. Now, the idler wheel did assemble out of the box with the components, but did require a little bit of elbow grease in order to do so. I'm not sure if this is just my example, but I found that the two halves, which conceal a polycap, by the way, are very, very tight with their tolerances. So much so that on this build, in order to get the wheel assembled correctly, I actually went ahead and used my bench vise. I'm going to be putting footage from when I did the procedure on an inset here in the corner, and you can see exactly how I did it. Now, arguably, yes, this is a bit of an overkill, but was a procedure that did work well on this model. I would recommend, if I was to do it again, probably to maybe bore out the one section of the row wheel that has the shaft in it so that the other half can slide in with a little bit less friction. But with the way the kit is, or again, on my example anyhow, it was on a very tight manner. Now, this is specifically true for someone that's going to be a beginner tackling one of these. You might have to add a little bit more elbow grease than usual in order to get this part assembled. But you have to be careful because you might actually crack some of the spokes that are on the recesses here. Which is why I recommend maybe you might want to take a drill bit or maybe some sandpaper to the other stem just to loosen up the tolerances a little bit for an easier fit. Now, with the return rollers, these are just dummy static pieces, but what's unique about the one in the rear is the little peg that we have integrally molded onto it. Now, on the real KV, this would be a mud scoop, and it would prevent mud from building up around the sprocket area. Now, on the real tank, this is obviously not connected to the roller, and it's actually part of the hull, but for the caricaturized model here, they went ahead and went with that route. Why this is noteworthy is because when it comes time for mounting these components to the vehicle, you have to be careful with the alignment because this little peg here can cause difficulties when it comes time for inserting of the sprocket. Now, insertion of the sprocket and the roller, again, are not impossible, but it's just one thing you just have to watch out for when it comes for the suspension on this vehicle. Now, moving there takes us to the tracks. Now, the tracks are the ones that I showed before, and they do have a rolling capability to them. So yes, you can push this model across the carpet and the tracks and running gear should roll with it. Although, like I frequently mentioned in these videos, you really want to refrain from doing that when you're building the model to this type of state with the painting and the weathering, as after a while the paint starts chipping off of the track and it really starts hurting the look of the build. But for a lot of people out there who collect these things, that is a question that they tend to ask me quite a bit. From the running gear takes us to the rear hull, and all the components you see here are stock. The only thing I want to point out is the paintwork here on the tail light. On the KV series, there is a tail light found on this rear section here, and if you ever built the old Tamiya one, you'll know that you'll think it's like a tube or some kind of an exhaust manifold, but in actuality, on the real KV series, it is a tail light. Only thing you need to do to make this piece pop is just take a little swipe of gloss red paint and just brush the little bulb section that's already integrally molded into the model. From the rear, this now brings us to the front of the model, starting with the two front toe rings. These are the stock units and are also present on the rear section as well. It gives the model a nice little detail kick. Moving upward takes to the front visor and the bow machine gun. Now, the bow machine gun is a stock unit, and you can see here it has some functionality to it where you can move it around slightly. Now, just like with all the other builds that I frequently do, I went ahead and drilled out the muzzle section with a pin vise and a small Dremel bit, and this always helps improve the look of the build against just leaving it molded solid. From the front brings us to the side storage equipment. Now for the KV, this is quite standard to have extra equipment mounted here on the side tin work. We have here this small little storage box. Now this is quite typical again for the KV family, and on the model here it's nicely rendered. It gives you that look and feel of what the storage box is, but in this little cartoonish format, which again is great for the overall look of the whole vehicle. Now the kit does give you several versions of this box, and what I mean by that is when you're done with the model, you are going to have a couple that are left over, and these are just purely spare. More than likely, with the way the runner configuration is, you're going to have one or two boxes that are just going to be odd men out. Now this is great in case you want to further enhance the model compared to the kit original, like the way you see it here, and you could customize it and make it a little bit more of your own. From the box takes us to this little rack where we have 3 jerry cans. They are a 2-piece assembly, and once assembled, give you the look that you see here. Further back, we have a section here of spare track, and now that takes us to the section on the opposite side. Here we have another segment of spare track and 2 more of those storage boxes. With the turret removed, and I'm going to go over that in a second why I had to do this, but this takes us now to the rear engine deck. Now, the rear engine deck has all of its stylized detailing, like the iconic dome, which is found on the rear portion of the KV's engine hatch, as well as those other 2 axis hatches that are found on these 2 ends. On these 2 sides here, we have that meshwork, which again is something that is seen on the KV, and as well as the exhaust manifold. Now what's nice is that on this model the exhaust manifold comes pre-drilled out, so you just simply mount them to the model as is, and they have some nice detailing already on them. From the exhaust manifold you can see the antenna, and this is again kit supplied, and yes, it has this weird kink to it, which is again part of the model's charm. I do have to watch out though, and this is true for all of the World War Toons builds, they do have these plastic antennas that are kit supplied, and they do work. However, one problem with plastic antennas I always found was their proneness to breakage. These things can snag very easily and are probably going to be one of the first things that break off on your model if you tend to handle it a lot. So you have to be careful when it comes to using this little bit of equipment here. Now, with the turret remounted to the vehicle, this is why I had to take it off to begin with. One quirk that this kit has that is not present on the other World War Toons models is that the turret on the KV cannot fully rotate. What I mean by that is that you have a limited arc of rotation from side to side. This here is the most you can rotate the turret, and the reason why is because of the shape here of the rear portion of the turret and how it makes contact with that dome found on the engine deck. Because of that, trying to make the turret rotate all the way is not going to be possible for this build. Now, if this was any other type of tank model, this would be a problem, but for the cartoonish caricature nature of this particular build, it's a pass for me. Moving along with the remainder of the turret detailing, basically all of the detailing that's found and present on the KV2 turret is found here on the caricature in one way, shape, form, or another. Starting with the handles, which are, again, an iconic piece of detailing found on the KV. They come in this banged and dinged up state, very similar to what was mentioned on the T-34 build that I recently completed and posted a video on. The KV is no different, and each one of these grab handles, I believe, are specific for their location, so you do have to pay attention to the instructions. Now, the instructions do a very good job with the marking on where each of these pieces go, but it's something that you have to be aware of. I say that because if you're one of those builders that likes to clip off all the handles, get them prepped, and then do the installation, it may lead to some confusion. So you want to do each one at a time. Moving rearward, you can see the detailing found back here, namely the two large doors, another one of those funky grab handles, and a rear machine gun, which would be found on the real KV2. Now, just like with the one on the front, it is possible to have the piece pivot around like you see it here. And just like with the unit in the front, I went ahead and drilled out the muzzle section with a Dremel bit and a pin vise. Moving forward takes us to the main gun. Now, the barrel can go up and down in a pretty good arc of motion. Now, like what was seen before with the unboxing portion, the mantlet and the barrel are integrally molded as one piece. And it is a two-piece assembly, which means you will have a seam line to contend with that will run along the entire span here of the rotor, the mantlet, as well as the barrel itself. Now, the seam work was relatively easy to polish away. I used basic modeling techniques, which would include some light sandpaper, a needle file, and I believe even just thick super glue. I didn't even need any type of putty or other type of media in order to address this. Now, the seam, again, polished away pretty well, but one area to watch out for is like this little section over here where it's elevated. If you're a little haphazard with your sanding, you can round these edges off, which can hurt the look, and you can also hurt the look on some of these areas over here found on the mantlet and also the rotor. And also be sure to really do a thorough job, because even though you may not necessarily see all of it, when you move the barrel up and down, you will expose more areas to visibility, which can possibly show the seam if not done in a thorough manner. Now, for most modelers out there, this information is basically a no-brainer and is relatively one that most people understand, but this is more along the lines, I'm gearing this for a beginner that may not necessarily have the skills or tools in order to fully understand how to remove a seam. So keep that in mind. If you don't know how to do that, I'm pretty sure there's some YouTube tutorials out there on how to polish away a seam on something like a gun barrel or a two-piece assembly on YouTube. Now, from the gun takes us to the turret roof. Again, all of the details are present and are nicely done with their moldings. And also, again, it just has that look and feel of the KV2. That now leads us directly to the main hatch. Now, just like with the other World War Toons builds, the hatch is able to be opened and closed, which is a interesting feature. And here's the hatch now in the open state. Now, I want to point out that on this model here, the hatch design is not really the greatest. You have this thin little plastic peg here, and in fact, I think I may have probably damaged it just trying to open it for this scene. The piece is very susceptible to breakage, so much so that I really don't advise manipulating this piece, and to the point where you might just want to dedicate the build to have the hatch either closed or open if you're going to put some kind of figure. I've seen a lot of guys put anime figures in these, more likely due to the Girls and Panzers anime. Regardless of whatever you do with it, again, you might want to just dedicate it either open or close. If you're trying to open and close it frequently, like I did here, it's just going to lead to the hatch snapping off on you. Now, while on that note, we also have this large cartoonish like hatch door crank over here, and this is also a piece that is a bit on the frail side, so you also want to watch out when handling the build. Be careful not to bump into that piece because it'll pop off fairly easily. I will say, though, that once the hatch is in its closed state, it has a nice flat appearance to it, and it doesn't like stick up or is on oblong in any way. Once the hatch is closed, it seals up pretty well. And this now leads us to the paint and the markings. Now, for the model's overall finish, I went with a Russian shade of olive drab that I played around with different washes and weathering techniques on this one. And in fact, with the techniques I learned from this one, as well as that other World War Toons T-34 have done, more than likely are going to be rehashed and recycled on other future Russian builds that I do have in the pipeline. Now, for the markings, the overly dramatic decals that are supplied with the kit were utilized on this build and were mounted in the locations which were suggested in the instructions. Now, just like with the other World War Toons builds, the decal quality was really good. They went on without any problems to mention for most of them. On this build, however, I did run into a snag with this banner that we have here on the rear, and after the unit was applied, some cracking and chipping away was noticed, but after everything was lacquered in place, it kind of cemented it down. Now, normally this might be an issue for some other builds, but for a tank and specifically a cartoon build like this, I just basically worked the chips into the weathering work, so it all basically evened out in the end. Well, in the end, I'm really happy on how this build turned out. Just like with the other World War Toons kits that I've built over the years, this KV2 was no different. These kits in general are a blast to build, they go together very quickly, easily, and when done, make for a nice display piece. From there, this springboards us into skill level and recommendation. Now, the model itself can be built by just about anybody. From the type of person who's never touched a plastic model kit in their life, to the individual who has an entire collection in their study of model kits that they've built over the years. These kits here are very beginner and advanced modeler friendly for that matter. Now for recommendations, anyone who's a fan of the World War Toons video game is clearly going to be very interested in one of these kits, and if you are, I can't recommend these kits enough for you. Other than that, these kits are also a great addition to add to your 1/35 scale or smaller tank collection. Because of the weird, unique subject matter, it makes for a nice, interesting display and conversation piece. These models here also make fantastic gifts because of their availability, their costs, and also with just the sheer ease of construction. So if you know anybody in your circle that likes military modeling, one of these vehicles here can make a great stocking stuffer, or also a really cool birthday present. And with that, that wraps up this model showcase video for this undefined scale, caricaturized Russian KV1 Heavy tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel, where it's a great way to keep up to date on new posted content, be it model showcase videos like this guy here, or the larger project update videos that frequently get posted to this channel. Another way to stay in the loop of new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There, I have more photographs of this particular model, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been posted on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Till next time.